If you were here last weekend, you met a priest that you won't soon forget. Father Matt Conley, my former student, came to visit, and he's been getting rave reviews all week. People are stopping me everywhere saying, oh, he was so funny, and people loved his message and just loved his presence up here at the altar. I will say you've got a little bit of explaining to do, because I was waiting for someone to interrupt him and say, don't say that about Father Scott. I forgive you. Do you remember how cold it was last week when he was here? He came a couple of days ahead of the weekend so we could spend some time together. And so one of those freezing cold days, we were out all day sightseeing. I took him around. And then we came back to the rectory. And our plan for the night was to watch some Netflix. So he went into the guest room and I went in to change into some warm lounging around clothes. And then he came out of the guest room and he said to me, can you do me a favor? I left something in your car. Can you go out and get it? Can you do me a favor? It was -10. And I was in my fleecy, loungy clothes. But you know, that's no different than the story in the gospel today. It's pretty much the same story. They had just gotten back from fishing all night, and it was frustrating. They had nothing. And this guy comes up and says, can you do me a favor? Can we go out in your boat and go fishing? Can you do me a favor? But they did it. And that made all the difference. And there are 3 different elements to this story that are also present in the first reading, that are present in every story of being called. So we need to get familiar with them, because we need to know what to look for when God's call might come our way. There are 3 elements that we need to look for. And the first one comes before the call ever happens. It is an openness to believe that the next thing that happens in your life might just be the work of God. We don't know what's around the corner, but the openness that something weird might happen today and it might look just annoying, but it actually might be the work of God, that's step 1. And we hear in this story, that's how it worked. The guy asked for something. I mean, the answer should have been no. Can we go out fishing? No, sorry, we're closed, buddy. No, we can't go out fishing. And we can imagine that there may have been other people he asked. Have you ever thought about that? Do you wonder if Peter was the first one he asked, or was Peter in a line of people? And the other ones said no, and so we don't hear about them, because they're not going to write about that in the gospel. That's boring. What if Peter had said no? Might we never have heard his name? Jesus would have gone on to the next boat looking for someone who would say yes. The question for us is, will we be able to see that it could be God's work in an annoying request? Something in Peter said, this guy seems like the real deal. It makes no sense to go out there, but I'm going to do it. But what will that look like for us? Might it come in the form of being asked to do something we don't want to do? It's never going to feel holy. It's going to probably feel mundane. Take the boat out. Might it be the homeless person who we encounter at just the right time? Might it be what happens when our car breaks down and we have the opportunity to say, is this just annoying or is God at work here? Might it be when we have leftovers and encounter somebody who wants them? Might it be when our plans get canceled? When on our way up to the airport, we check our flight info and it turns out it's canceled? What are those things that might be the work of God but look mundane? If we decide that we don't want to go with it, if we decide that it's just mundane, if we, like Peter, had the chance to say, no, thanks, buddy, we're gonna stay here, no boat. The best thing we can do is to just pretend that that wasn't God. Just imagine, oh, that was a false alarm. That's a fluke. Because if we actually turned God away from an encounter, how would we ever live with that? That'd be devastating to have missed that opportunity. So better, if we ever do say no, just forget about it. Because dwelling on it will make you feel terrible. The first element for hearing God's call is openness that it's going to come some weird way. That it's not going to look like God's work, but it may just be the work of God, this next annoying thing. The second element, which is in all these stories, and will be in yours and mine too, it's going to involve some work. We're going to have to put some labor in this. So, we hear that Jesus asks them, can we take the boat out? Go into the deep water? He doesn't promise anything. He doesn't say, if you do, I promise you there's a miracle in it for you. Doesn't say that. Makes no promise. Just says, let's go out. Do you mind? A friend said that she was recently looking through an old notebook to see if she could repurpose it. And she found a note to herself that she had written years ago and totally forgotten about. In her own writing in the notebook, it said, your labor is your contribution to the miracle. She wrote to herself, your labor is your contribution to the miracle. And that's exactly right. Every miracle is the work of God. We don't create it, but we do cooperate. You know that life is a dance. It's always a dance between making things happen and letting them happen. Most of life we don't get to control. We just kind of dance through it. And it's always been that way. But when it's true for someone else, we often don't recognize how much effort went into their story. We tell lots of stories and gloss over how hard it must have been. We say things like, well, after they celebrated the first Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims then hunkered down for their first winter in New England. That was impossible. We say it like it's a fact. Or we say, fun fact, did you know that before he was elected president, Abraham Lincoln lost 4 elections to U.S. Congress and spent all of his money on the campaigns and was completely decimated? Fun fact. Not to him. Did you know that before he became the president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela spent 30 years in a maximum security prison with an unjust sentence? All of those stories, we just kind of know, and we say, oh yeah, that's interesting. It wasn't interesting, it was hard. They were willing to do the work. They did what they had to do. And yes, there were miracles. But the miracles, they didn't have control over. They just had to do the work. We all are the same way. No jockey gets to jump on the winning horse at the Kentucky Derby when it's in the winner's circle. You get to start on that horse when it's in the mud and go the whole way with it. So the first element is you got to be open that this next thing that looks weird and mundane might actually be God's work. Number 2, you've got to be willing to put the labor in yourself, because that's always a part of it. And then the third thing, which for a lot of us is the hardest, you have to get over your disbelief that God could be choosing you. For a lot of us, that's the hardest. We hear that with Peter. Lord, not me. Depart from me, Lord, because I am a sinful man. You don't know who you're asking. If you knew who you were asking, you would not. That is such a universal feeling that people have. It actually has a name. It's called imposter syndrome. Maybe you've heard of that. Imposter syndrome is that terrible, insecure voice in your head that says, you're not worthy of this. If they knew who you were, they would never let you stand up there and do that. They would take your license away. And the hard part about this is we all have it, but everybody thinks they're the only one. Imposter syndrome. I'm told that this is universal for new parents. Almost every new parent, when they're holding that newborn, has a terrible thought that they don't say out loud, but I'm not qualified for this. They should not let me leave this hospital with this baby. I don't know what I'm doing. Every priest or sister has that story too. All of us at some point were like, what am I doing? Who do I think I am that I'm called? I'm not good enough for this. I can't do this. And this is a universal problem. All of us have this voice, and all of us think we're the only one who has that voice. So I know someone who told me what she does to try to help. She said that sometimes, some weeks she'll come to church and she'll be dealing with a terrible imposter syndrome situation. And so, you know that part of Mass where the priest holds up Jesus in the form of the Eucharist and says, "Behold the Lamb of God"? And then we all respond, "Lord, I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word and my soul shall be healed." She says that if it's been a very bad week for imposter syndrome, she lowers her voice so that she doesn't get anybody else off. But when it's time to say that, she quietly says, "Lord, you make me worthy to enter under my roof, and by your word I am healed." It's just a little reminder when she needs it. I'm not the one who decides worthy or not. That's up to God. These are elements in everyone's call. There's no way you can have a call and not wrestle with these three things. Openness to this weird thing possibly being God's voice, willingness to do the labor, and belief that you actually are good enough to be called, even if you feel like you're not. So this week, we are being invited to bring our awareness to the way that God calls people, because your story of being called, whenever it comes, is going to involve these elements. And we need to be prepared for that. The elements, the way it unfolds, are always pretty much according to the same order. It starts with it never being obvious that it's happening. It feels totally mundane. There's no warning ahead of time. All of a sudden, you're in the situation and didn't see it coming. It's likely to involve an annoying task that no one would really want to do, especially at this moment. You'll always be able to say no. It'll be your option. You'll never be forced. And if you do, your best course of action if you say no will be to convince yourself it was a fluke, because otherwise you will be tortured. And it's important to remember that whatever you think of yourself doesn't matter, because it's not what you think of yourself, it's what God thinks of you that counts. So this is it, friends. The call could come at any time, and there's not going to be a warning. In fact, if there's any warning, consider it this. Any one of us could be called. All of us are made worthy by God. And just so you know, I don't want to make you nervous, but the fact that you're here right now listening to this means you're already on God's short list.